Have you ever noticed how the quest for partnership has become the central organizing principle in so many lives? This search for the perfect relationship, the ideal companion, the romantic fulfillment that society promises will complete us. We pursue it with such earnestness, such dedication, as if finding that special someone will finally resolve the existential restlessness that haunts our quiet moments. But what if this entire framework is a culturally constructed illusion? What if the very pursuit of romantic partnership as we understand it is actually a subtle form of self-imprisonment, a voluntary confinement of consciousness that we've been conditioned to desire and celebrate? There is something profoundly peculiar about how we've constructed the notion of romantic partnership in our society. We take two autonomous beings, each with their own mysterious inner universe, their own cosmic potential for growth and transformation, and we begin the process of mutual domestication. We start to craft expectations, build routines, establish boundaries, create shared narratives. The relationship becomes an entity unto itself, a third presence demanding allegiance and conformity from both participants. And slowly, imperceptibly, like water carving a canyon through stone, the relationship begins to reshape the individuals within it. The most insidious aspect of this process is that we've been taught to interpret the signs of this confinement as evidence of love and commitment. The narrowing of possibilities becomes settling down. The mutual expectations become building a life together. The gradual sacrifice of individual potential is reframed as compromise and maturity. We've created an entire vocabulary that transforms the gradual constriction of consciousness into a celebrated cultural milestone. We hold ceremonies to commemorate the beginning of this confinement. We give gifts to celebrate the commencement of mutual limitation. We applaud as two infinitely complex beings agree to define themselves primarily through their connection to one another. This is not to say that human connection itself is the problem. Far from it. The capacity for profound intimacy between conscious entities is one of the great mysteries and gifts of existence. The issue lies in how we've institutionalized these connections, how we've wrapped them in expectations and social contracts that subtly redirect the flow of personal evolution away from unbounded exploration and toward conformity with established patterns. Think of the relationship as it usually unfolds in our culture. Two people meet, and at first there is mystery, there is discovery, there is the electric sensation of encountering another consciousness, another perspective on the vast tapestry of existence. But then culture intervenes with its templates and expectations. The wildness of that initial connection gets channeled into familiar patterns. Dating becomes moving towards something. Spontaneous moments of connection become building a foundation. The mystery of another being becomes something to solve rather than something to continually explore. And gradually, the boundless potential of human connection gets reduced to a set of social forms that everyone can recognize and affirm. What gets lost in this process is nothing less than the opportunity for genuine co-creation between conscious entities. Instead of two autonomous beings coming together to explore what might emerge between them, we get two people fulfilling roles that existed long before they ever met. The script was written generations ago, and we step into our parts with remarkable obedience, rarely questioning whether these patterns serve the expansion of consciousness or its containment. I want to pause for a moment and ask you directly, when did you first sense that your relationships were shaping you in ways that felt constraining rather than expansive? That moment when you realized the person you were becoming in partnership was somehow smaller, more predictable, less adventurous than the person you might have become on your own. The instant when you recognized that in gaining companionship, you were trading away possibilities that you couldn't even fully articulate. I know, this recognition can be profoundly unsettling. You look at your partner, your marriage, your domestic arrangements, and you begin to see the invisible architecture of limitation that you've collaboratively constructed. You see how your identity has become entangled with another's expectations, how your choices are filtered through the lens of their preferences, how the wildness within you has been gradually domesticated. And perhaps most disturbing is the realization that you've participated willingly in this process, that you've interpreted these limitations as signs of love and commitment. I want you to know that this recognition, uncomfortable as it may be, is not a judgment on your choices or your connections. It's an awakening to the cultural programming that has shaped our understanding of what intimacy should look like. And this awakening matters, not just for you personally, but for our collective evolution toward more authentic forms of human connection. That's why I invite you to share your moment of recognition in the comments below. You can simply copy this phrase and complete it. I realized my relationship was limiting my consciousness when, by sharing this insight, you're not only clarifying your own experience, but you're also extending a hand to someone else who might be struggling with similar doubts. someone who senses the confinement but lacks the framework to understand it. Your words might be precisely what another person needs to validate their own questioning, to know they aren't betraying love by wondering if there might be other ways of connecting that don't require such profound compromise of potential. This community of awakening individuals grows stronger every time we acknowledge these uncomfortable truths to one another. Like a mycelial network beneath the forest floor, we connect invisibly, nourishing each other's growth toward more authentic forms of being. Now, let's continue exploring what happens when we begin to reimagine intimate connection beyond the prescribed cultural templates that have dominated our understanding for so long. The predicament we face is that we've been offered a tremendously impoverished vision of what human connection could be. We've been shown models of relationship that are fundamentally based on ownership, on exclusivity, on the reduction of the infinite complexity of human bonding to a set of social and legal arrangements. We've been taught to measure the success of our intimate connections by their longevity, their stability, their conformity to recognized patterns, rather than by their capacity to foster mutual growth and expanded consciousness. What would it mean to approach intimate connection without these preconceptions? To encounter another being not as a potential partner in the conventional sense, but as a fellow traveler in consciousness, someone with whom we might explore dimensions of experience that neither of us could access alone? What if instead of asking, "Is this relationship moving forward?" we asked, "Is this connection expanding my awareness of what's possible in human experience?" The great paradox here is that by releasing our grip on the conventional forms of relationship, we might actually access deeper and more meaningful forms of connection. By loosening our attachments to the culturally prescribed progression of intimacy, we create space for authentic bonds to emerge organically, shaped by the unique qualities of the consciousnesses involved, rather than by external expectations. There is a profound intimacy available beyond the scripts we've been handed, but accessing it requires a willingness to step into uncertainty, to relinquish the comforting predictability of familiar patterns. This isn't about rejecting connection or celebrating isolation. Quite the opposite. It's about recognizing that the models of relationship we've inherited might be severely limiting the potential depth and breadth of human bonding. It's about questioning whether the forms of intimacy we've been taught to pursue are adequate vessels for the complexity of conscious beings in communion with one another. Consider how our conventional understanding of relationship channels the vast ocean of possible connections into a narrow stream of prescribed interactions. We date to determine compatibility for long-term partnership. We partner to establish a shared life. We establish a shared life oriented around a common domicile, perhaps children, financial entanglement, social recognition, and at each step, possibilities are eliminated, avenues of exploration are closed off, potential dimensions of connection are left unexplored. What's particularly striking about this process is how it steadily narrows the scope of growth for both individuals involved. The relationship becomes a container with defined boundaries, rather than a spacious field for mutual evolution. We become identified with our roles within the relationship, rather than continuing to explore the full spectrum of our potential. The very structure of conventional partnership requires a kind of settling, a premature conclusion about who we are and what we might become. But what if we understood that the purpose of human connection is not to arrive at a stable configuration of mutual dependence, but to serve as catalysts for each other's expansion? What if we recognize that the highest gift we can offer another is not our loyalty to who they have been or who we expect them to be, but our commitment to creating conditions in which they might discover dimensions of themselves yet unexplored? This perspective requires a fundamental shift in how we understand love itself. In our culture, love has become deeply entangled with concepts of possession, exclusivity, and expectation. We speak of my partner, my spouse, as if conscious beings could be owned. We structure our connections around expectations of behavioral and emotional exclusivity that often serve to contain rather than liberate the consciousness within. We construct elaborate agreements about what love should look like, how it should be expressed, what forms it should and should not take. But what if love is not a force of containment but a force of liberation? What if the truest expression of love is not the desire to define and secure another's presence in our lives, but the courage to continually make space for their becoming, even when that becoming leads in unexpected directions? This is not to suggest that commitment has no value or that the longevity of connection is meaningless. Rather, it's to propose that true commitment might look very different from what we've been taught. Perhaps genuine commitment is not to a particular form that a connection must maintain, but to the ongoing process of discovery between consciousnesses in communion. Perhaps fidelity in its deepest sense is not adherence to a predetermined structure of relationship, but faithfulness to the authentic unfolding of connection, wherever that may lead. The fear, of course, is that without the familiar structures of conventional relationship, we will lose something essential, that connection will become ephemeral or superficial. But this fear assumes that without external containment, human bonds lack inherent substance or staying power. It fails to recognize that the most profound connections between beings emerge not from obligation or agreement, but from the natural resonance between consciousnesses attuned to each other's depths. What might emerge if we approached intimate connection with fewer preconceptions about its necessary form? If we allowed our bonds with others to reveal their own organic structure, rather than imposing patterns inherited from culture and tradition? If we recognize that the path of authentic connection might not resemble any relationship model we've been shown? This is not about abandoning all structure or rejecting the validity of lasting bonds. It's about creating space for new forms of connection to emerge, forms that might be better suited to the expansion of consciousness rather than its comfortable containment. It's about recognizing that the evolution of human consciousness might require the evolution of how conscious beings commune with one another. The practical reality of this perspective is understandably challenging. We live in social contexts that recognize and support conventional relationship models, while providing little framework for alternative approaches to intimate connection. We've built our expectations, our legal systems, even our economic arrangements around particular understandings of how human beings should bond with one another. To step outside these frameworks is to venture into territory with few maps and limited social support. And yet this is precisely the kind of boundary dissolution that the evolution of consciousness often requires. Throughout human history, consciousness has expanded by questioning the limitations of inherited structures, by exploring beyond the edges of established maps, by being willing to step into uncertainty for the possibility of discovering more authentic ways of being. The journey beyond conventional relationship models is not an easy one. It requires tolerating uncertainty, facing fear, moving through periods of profound disorientation. It means recognizing how deeply our identities have become intertwined with cultural narratives about connection, belonging, and love. It means being willing to encounter the void that opens up when familiar structures are questioned, when we step away from templates that have provided orientation and meaning. But on the other side of that uncertainty lies the possibility of connections that serve the expansion of consciousness, rather than its comfortable confinement. There is the potential for intimacy that doesn't require the sacrifice of possibility, communion that doesn't demand the narrowing of potential, bonds that strengthen through mutual liberation rather than mutual dependence. This is not a path that can be prescribed or defined in advance. Each exploration beyond the boundaries of conventional relationship will take its own unique form, shaped by the specific consciousnesses involved and the particular context of their communion. There is no new template to replace the old, only the invitation to approach connection with fewer preconceptions and greater attentiveness to what might authentically emerge between beings in communion. What becomes possible when we release our grip on predetermined forms of connection, when we approach each encounter with another consciousness as an opportunity for mutual discovery rather than a step in a familiar progression, when we allow ourselves to be surprised by what might emerge between beings who refuse to confine each other to expected roles. Trust the process of this exploration. Trust that by questioning the limitations of conventional relationship models, you are not rejecting connection, but creating space for more authentic forms of communion to emerge. Trust that the discomfort of uncertainty is not an indication of wrongness, but a necessary passage in the evolution toward greater authenticity in how conscious beings relate to one another. What emerges from this questioning is not a rejection of intimacy, but the possibility of deeper forms of connection, not an abandonment of commitment, but a more profound understanding of what commitment might mean, not a retreat from love, but an expansion of our capacity to love beyond the confining structures we've inherited. And when you begin to experience connection beyond the prescribed patterns, when you taste the particular flavor of intimacy that becomes possible when beings relate to one another without the weight of cultural expectation, you realize that what was lost was far less valuable than what becomes possible in its absence. The security of familiar forms gives way to the aliveness of authentic communion. The comfort of predetermined paths yields to the adventure of mutual discovery. If these reflections on relationship and consciousness expansion have resonated with something deep within you, know that you are not alone in questioning the conventional structures of intimate connection. This questioning is arising in many consciousness across our world, part of a larger awakening to the possibility that our inherited templates for human bonding might be inadequate vessels for the depth and complexity of what can emerge between conscious beings in communion. By subscribing to this channel, you join a community of individuals who are exploring beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding, who are willing to question even our most cherished assumptions about how human beings should connect with one another. Each video we share is an invitation to venture further into this territory, to consider perspectives that might initially seem disorienting, but that contain seeds of liberation from limitations we've come to accept as necessary or natural. We're not offering simple solutions or advocating for any particular alternative to conventional relationship models. Rather, we're creating a space for honest exploration of what becomes possible when we approach human connection with fewer preconceptions and greater attentiveness to the authentic unfolding of communion between conscious beings. If you find yourself questioning the structures of relationship that our culture presents as inevitable or desirable, if you sense that there might be forms of connection that better serve the expansion of consciousness rather than its comfortable containment, this channel is a sanctuary for that questioning. Subscribe and join a growing community of consciousness explorers who are reimagining the possibilities of human connection beyond inherited limitations. Together we form a field of emerging awareness, each contributing to a collective exploration of what intimacy might become when liberated from the constraints of cultural expectation. A simple subscription is a step into this field, a signal that you too are interested in discovering what lies beyond the familiar territories of conventional relationship, and that willingness to explore beyond established boundaries, to question even our most fundamental assumptions about how beings should commune with one another, is the very essence of consciousness evolution itself.